Kinder Morgan has suspended the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. Who knew OPEC's best allies were Prime Minister Kendall and the NDP's socialist busybodies? Kinder Morgan just announced they are suspending all non-essential activities for the Trans Mountain Pipeline twinning project from Alberta to the coast of British Columbia. Now, in the press release, the company said, "In the current environment, we will not put Kinder Morgan shareholders at risk on the remaining project spend." Now, the press release went on to specifically cite the continued actions in opposition to the project by the province of British Columbia. Kinder Morgan is making this announcement after already spending $1.1 billion on the $7.4 billion project. Kinder Morgan is ready to cut a $1.1 billion loss because British Columbia is not respecting the Canadian Constitution, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, well, he doesn't really care if they don't. The company is done fighting this alone. They're not spending another penny or another dollar fighting for this pipeline anymore. It's so bad that Kinder Morgan President Ian Anderson told BC Premier John Horgan that the company was being unnecessarily harassed by the province of BC. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, well, he did what he does, and he sent a tweet that said, "Canada is a country of the rule of law, and the federal government will act in the national interest. Access to world markets for Canadian resources is a core national interest. The Trans Mountain expansion will be built." Yeah, so a couple of things here. Suddenly, Trudeau cares about the rule of law, which is sort of peculiar considering he's been completely silent about the mayhem and chaos that has been ongoing on Burnaby Mountain as the protests roll on. Multiple police officers have been hurt, and the protesters have been doing something they call de-arresting because they do not recognize Canadian law. De-arresting basically amounts to kicking police officers in the head while resisting arrest and then sending those cops to the hospital. The federal government isn't and has not acted in the national interest with regard to Trans Mountain or any other pipeline for that matter. They've done everything but. They can't even do the symbolic things like vote for conservative motions to show support for pipelines. I mean, if you really want to know what Justin Trudeau feels about the Trans Mountain Pipeline, just listen to his brain, Gerald Butts, talk here.
We think that the oil sands have been expanded too rapidly without a serious plan for environmental remediation in the first place. So that's why we don't think it's up to us to decide whether there should be another route for a pipeline, because the real alternative is not an alternative route, it's an alternative economy.
And over here in Alberta, Rachel Notley is making a lot of crazy noise, saying she's demanding concrete action from the federal government without ever saying what concrete action really means. Notley's even going so far as to suggest Alberta will go full Venezuela and take ownership stakes in the Kinder Morgan pipeline in an attempt to get the thing done. What that means is Alberta is willing to spend money we don't have on a project that is already fully funded in the private sector and move the financial risk onto the Alberta taxpayer, and somehow that's supposed to make the foreign-funded radicals in British Columbia suddenly like this pipeline. Is that what she's saying? Wasn't the carbon tax supposed to do all that for us? And I really wouldn't trust Rachel Notley to own a lemonade stand, let alone take ownership in a multi-billion-dollar pipeline project. And speaking of Rachel Notley, let's take a look at what Rachel Notley's NDP cohorts, colleagues, and former co-workers have to say about the suspension of this multi-billion-dollar project. Remember NDP Member of Parliament for Burnaby South, Kennedy Stewart? He was arrested with Green Party leader Elizabeth May at a Kinder Morgan worksite for violating a court injunction meant to keep those kooks off a working job site. Anyway, Stewart sent a tweet celebrating, saying, "We're winning, stop Kinder Morgan." BC NDP Premier John Horgan sent a tweet saying that British Columbia will do everything I can to block the pipeline. And then he told a news conference in Victoria that the ongoing protest demonstrations and actions are playing a part in blocking Kinder Morgan. Those are the illegal actions of protesters that have, like I said before, resulted in several police officers being injured in the line of duty, and they're being directly endorsed by the BC Premier. It's absolutely lawlessness in BC regarding this pipeline. And the BC Environment Minister has been having closed-door meetings with those same violent radicals from those illegal protests. And about those protests, guess who's leading them? Our old friend, Tzeporah Berman. She told the National Observer in a Facebook Live interview that she's been working against Kinder Morgan for 5 years. Just listen.
I've been working on the Kinder Morgan pipeline for 5 years now.
5 years, you say? That means Berman was working against Kinder Morgan during the time Rachel Notley selected her to chair the Alberta government's Oil Sands Advisory Group. That means the whole time Berman was working against Kinder Morgan, by her own admission, during the time she was working for the Alberta government and raking in $23,000 in compensation for her troubles. And we know Berman was not fired for her anti-oil stance or all the derogatory things she said about Alberta oil and gas. Instead, Berman was just released from the panel because, according to Notley, her job was finished. Her work was all done. And while it's not well known, Tim Gray of Environmental Defense still sits as an Oil Sands Advisory Group panelist. Here's Environmental Defense listing the 10 reasons Trans Mountain shouldn't be built. What would Notley and Trudeau and Horgan have done differently if they were working for a foreign government to block pipelines and scare away oil and gas development here in Canada? Look at all the radicals they've appointed to make decisions. Look at all the policies, like carbon taxes, that they've implemented to deter investment to Canada. Horgan and Notley and Trudeau are the best OPEC salesmen those dirty dictators ever had. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn-Reid. Did you know that we have our own Rebel Media mobile app? It's available on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. Download it, give it a whirl, take the other side of the story with you wherever you go.